Aperture is one of those camera settings that most landscape photographers think that they understand, but when they get out into the field, they still end up getting it wrong. They end up with soft or noisy landscape photos. And the funny thing is, choosing the perfect aperture, well, it's actually pretty simple when you understand what it actually does to your images. So in this video, I'm going to explain what Aperture does and how you can use it as a tool to create professional level landscape images no matter what camera that you use. Now, when I first got started with landscape photography, I was told that apertures higher than f16 or so are required to create landscape images that are sharp from front to back. But what if I told you that using higher apertures like this can turn what could be a professional looking landscape photo that you're going to be proud to hang in your home into a soft, mushy mess? Now, most lenses tend to be sharp at f5.6 rather than f16 because, well, light is kind of weird. Light acts as a particle flying through the air on some occasions, and then acts like a wave rippling across liquid in other situations. So just for a moment, if you imagine light being a wave, and if you imagine this wave hitting a wall that's got a hole in it, well, as this wave passes through the hole, the wave is going to spread out. And importantly for us, the smaller the hole, the more this wave spreads out. And this is important for us because this is exactly what's happening when light passes through the aperture of your camera lens, otherwise known as the hole in the front of it. So the smaller the aperture, the more that light spreads out and the more that it bounces around your lens rather than traveling straight through to your sensor. And so because of this bouncing of light going all over the place, your image becomes less sharp. So this would lead us to believe then that you could just shoot at a lower aperture and get razor sharp photos every single time, right? Well, no, that's not actually true either. Diffraction is only one of the nuances of light that can lead your photos to look soft. There's another type of blur that can ruin your photos if you get your aperture wrong. Now, in this image, you can see that my very handsome golden retriever Walter is in razor sharp focus, yet the background is crazy blurred. And you've seen this before, right? This blurred background effect happens when using wide apertures like f2.8 or even wider, and this is all because of the circle of confusion. Now, I'm going to explain what that is in a second, but first, why do we get these blurry photos in the first place? Well, when a specific point of light travels through our focus element, which is the glass inside our lens that moves it back and forth to focus our subject, it gets focused to a specific point, which, very unsurprisingly, is called the focal point. And when our focal plane, which for us landscape photographers is our camera sensor, when that meets the focal point, we get an image that is in focus. The tighter the focal point, the sharper the image appears. So when this focal point becomes sharp enough, it becomes a circle of confusion. It basically means that the circle of light has gone from blurry to blurry to blurry to now sharp enough that we consider it no longer blurred. And obviously this is a very dumb name. It'd make way more sense to call it the circle of sharpness or something like that, but alas, that is what it is. That's what it's called. Now, if we want to go one step further here, if we take our 2D image and we make it 3D, you're going to see that the cones of focused light meet at a point. And again, if this point is at our sensor, then the image is going to appear sharp because we created a circle of confusion. But if our focal plane doesn't hit this sharp point of focus, if we slice that cone further along, then our point of light is going to appear bigger and it's going to appear blurry. So going back to Walter, his face is in the focal plane and so it appears sharp, and the flowers behind him are miles away from the focal plane, which leads to a large area of blur, and so they're not sharp. And this out of focus blur is called defocus blur. And well, if you're shooting portraits of your dog, this can be great. It really separates the subject from the background. It also works great if you're shooting landscape like things of like flowers or a scene where there's a specific subject that you want the viewer to focus on. But that isn't the entirety of landscape photography. What does this mean for landscape photographers who are shooting bigger scenes, who want the scene sharp from front to back? Well, it means that we're in a constant battle with our aperture, because if we make our aperture too small and use something like f22, we're going to get a soft image because of diffraction. But if we use an aperture that's too big, like f2.8 or even f4 in some scenes, then a percentage of our image is going to be blurry because of defocus blur. So what can we do to grab razor sharp photos across the frame without getting stuck with soft images from diffraction or defocus blur? Well, thankfully, there's actually a really simple solution. This is something that I cover in detail in my 6-week live landscape photography training program. And if you want to start taking professional level photos in the next 6 weeks, click the link in the description to check it out. Now, I don't do this for every single photo, but recently I was out shooting in the Peak District here in the UK with my mate Dem, who is a world-class landscape photographer. And I was setting up this shot and suddenly snow started tumbling down out of nowhere and the light popped out from behind a cloud, and I knew this was a killer moment, and so I didn't want to mess up the shot. So rather than taking one shot at f16 and just praying that I wasn't going to end up with some part of my photo being soft because of diffraction, or attempting to take a photo at f2.8 or f4 and having half of my image out of focus because of defocus blur, instead I took a different route. I took 4 shots at f5.6 and I made sure that I captured across these different shots every part of my scene in razor sharp focus. I then used a process called focus stacking to take the sharpest parts of each of these photos and stitch them together into one uber sharp photo in Photoshop, where I keep the sharp parts and just bin off the soft bits of these images. And focus stacking is really simple. All you've got to do in Lightroom is select your photos, then right click, select edit, and then open in layers within Photoshop. Photoshop is going to pop up in front of you. You're then going to select your layers. You're going to select edit in the menu, click auto align layers so everything's all nicely and aligned. You're then going to click OK. Then you're going to go to edit again, click auto blend layers, stack your images, click OK, and then you're done. And there's one final step that I'll take. I will select my layers, I'll press Ctrl Alt Shift E, and I'll create a new single layer from those selected layers, and then I'll carry on editing the photo as if it's just, as well it is at this point, just one single photo that I'm editing. Now, you might be thinking, Will, I can't be asked of all this focus stacking faff. Just tell me what it is. What is the best aperture I can use to just take a single photo and just be done with it? Well, to answer that question, you might need to get out your measuring tape. Okay, so you want the quickest, easiest way to nail your aperture so you can take sharp landscape photos that you can be proud of with as minimal faff. Then if that's the case, you want to shoot at f16, focusing on what's called the hyperfocal point. And yes, it all sounds very fancy, but it's actually really simple to implement, and this is what a lot of professional landscape photographers do when they're out shooting day to day in the field. Now, the hyperfocal point is just the point of focus where not just your foreground is in focus and not just your background is in focus, but to the best of your ability and your camera lenses and physics ability, both elements are in what's called acceptable focus. Now, what the heck then does acceptable focus mean? Well, let me give you an example. Now, this image looks pretty sharp from front to back, right? Well, the reality is that the foreground is crazy sharp, absolutely. But the background is only acceptably sharp, as in it looks fine and it's not distracting, but if you do zoom in, it's not perfectly sharp and there's a little bit of softness creeping in there. Now, this shared in a YouTube video or shared over social media, nobody's going to see that the foreground is slightly sharper than the background, and so that makes the image acceptably sharp. Now, to get this extended depth of field, we need to focus on a specific point within our scene that's known as the hyperfocal point. And how do we uncover this magical focus spot? Well, there are 2 methods. One method is accurate, but it requires a pen and paper, a calculator, and a tape measure to get it right. The other way, which I'm going to show you in a second, is what the professionals use day to day. First method to calculate your hyperfocal distance uses this equation. And so with a 60mm hyperfocal distance and an f16 aperture and a 4-frame sensor, the hyperfocal distance is going to be around 55 centimeters away from the camera sensor in your shot. And if you want to do this properly, you get your tape measure out, you get everything lined up, and you focus at that point in the scene. Now, of course, I have never done a calculation like this in the field. You are never going to do a calculation like this. And then unless you are shooting very specific types of photography, which landscape is not one of these specific types of photography, the pros don't do it either. So the second method to calculate your hyperfocal distance is to use the close enough measurement, and that is to focus around 1/3 into your frame. And in most situations, that's going to be close enough to the actual hyperfocal distance that your foreground is sharp and your background is going to be acceptably sharp. And then wham bam, you've got yourself an image that is more than sharp enough to share on social media or in YouTube videos or anything like that without any of the effort of focus stacking. And now you know how to capture professional looking landscape shots by mastering your aperture. What do you actually do with those images once they're sat on your hard drive? Well, watch this video up here to learn the one thing that professional photographers do with their images that often separates them from the amateurs out there.